Octopath Traveler has been a revelation since the first game came out. Never got the chance to play it, but I did play the second one, just didn't get to finish it due to time constraints. I loved the game though. We'll see if I finish Zero, because there are a couple other games I'd love to cover, especially considering that there's not much guide potential for Zero. Consider this video an early review and not a full review. That's an important distinction. So far played the game for around 18 hours, finishing Titus and August campaigns. Key was provided by Square Enix. Zero is a prequel where some of the characters from the first two games are making a return. It tells the story of a ring bearer that sets on the journey of dealing with three other evil ring bearers. Writing overall so far is okay, but can't think of it as any better than that. Characters that carry the story and writing are those evil villains. While the story is without much nuance due to it being strictly good versus evil, the way these evil villains operate is truly something to experience. Villains are divided into three categories: wealth, power and fame, each magnified by the rings of power they wield. To what depths these three bastards are willing to sink themselves is astonishing. I was especially impressed by August and what he does to get inspired to write masterpiece art performances, and how he makes even your fight against him into some kind of a play. Each villain has a special character that is tied to the story. Most impressive, in my opinion, being the story of Velnorti and Rinu, or whatever the pronunciation is. Love the story of a branded criminal that created a powerful elixir to help Titus, or Titus. Twists and turns in that particular story are really good. And that's the extent of the good writing. Side stories that are part of the occasional quest are quite weak, with dialogue writing being subpar mostly, with occasional truly bad ones. Prologue was particularly painfully bad filler dialogue after filler dialogue, and then when some epic scene was supposed to come, it was ruined by the cringy dialogue. Another issue with the writing is the decision making, or lack thereof. Even when presented with a simple yes or no option, both options lead to the same conclusion. NPCs literally ignore your choice. Why then put the choice there in the first place? Really strange, and it takes away from the story because the game gives a false hope of making our own stories along the way. But then it takes it away. Simply removing these choice options would have been much better. Far more better would be actually having a proper decision-making system with branching story. This weird choice of offering meaningless decisions is the worst thing they could have done. And how many times do we need to have a JRPG starting with the burning village? Can't they think of anything else at this point? Thankfully, villains in my 18 hours of game time were enough to keep me going to see what happens next, because some unexpectedly shocking things occur. Let's move on to gameplay. It's divided by non-combat interaction with the NPCs and combat. In every city there are NPCs that can be interacted with in many ways. First we inquire about them, then we can challenge them to combat, which yields items, and sometimes they join us for a couple fights. Then there are options to hire them outright, and the most important one is inviting them to the town that we are rebuilding. So the burned village prologue makes more sense this time around, because one of the goals of the game is to rebuild it, which I'll get to in a bit. I honestly don't know what to think about the whole path system, meaning interactions with the NPCs. It adds to the game, because it's rewarding in terms of new items and the new types of combat encounters. So they are more than just someone that's going to tell you a sentence or two, which is the usual thing that happens in JRPGs. They are more meaningful than that. However, it ends up as a kinda, for the lack of a better word, hollow system, because these backgrounds learned from inquiry are not that interesting, nor do these characters interact with us in a meaningful way. Mostly ends up as an RNG thing to grab some items and eventually invite them to town. As I said, it's a good system that makes NPCs more significant, but these NPCs and the way they interact with us are shallow. Not to mention weird stuff like level 60-year-old granny that could beat 7 shades of shit out of us until much later in the game, because of the arbitrary high level attached to her that makes no logical sense. When it comes to village rebuilding, so far what I've seen is quite a basic system that doesn't offer much outside of linear building progression. I'm sure later it gives more freedom and adds more complexity to it, where we actually have to think occasionally as to what to do. So far it didn't add anything to the game except connection to the story. Hopefully it expands significantly later on. Talking about non-combat gameplay, I have to criticize maps that are as basic as it gets, making exploration subpar. Couple streets on each map with few dead ends where the potential chest could be. Really disappointed how they've done it. Even more frustrating considering how beautiful the backgrounds are. Most of the time I was enjoying the view because there wasn't much else to enjoy while exploring. Now we get to combat. Octopath Traveler series has, in my opinion, one of the best combat systems in JRPGs ever. It's really fast for a turn-based game with fantastic visual effects and lots of depth. 8 characters on the field with 4 in front and 4 at the back. They can be switched anytime the front row character has the turn. This adds tons of gameplay dynamics and tactical diversity. Skills like Expert First Aid that upon being used moves the caster automatically to the back row. Then some skills like Charging Blade that increase damage if used from the back row, meaning switching to the back row character and then using it. Or Pen skill that increases damage based on how many times he's been hit this turn. Combined with Provoke, it can be a really good option when fighting many enemies. Tons of buffing and debuffing options. I've tried building my main character as a debuffer and buffer, might even add healing eventually to do all in one. There is a massive problem though. In the 18 hours that I've played the game, it's been a stroll in the park. Haven't died once. Didn't even come close. Game is piss easy. That is a terrible difficulty design for the type of game that offers such a deep combat system. Problem is that when the game is this easy, it never encourages players to interact with the character and team building systems in place, because there's no need. At some point I stopped caring altogether and went into every boss fight without a care in the world, because I knew that there was no need to even use SP points for special skills, except against main bosses. I've googled if maybe there was a difficulty mode choice that was accidentally skipped over, but there isn't such a thing. I've also read that the game gets much tougher later on, which indicates complete and utter lack of balancing. Games like these should be challenging all the time, not just occasionally. I'm supposed to play the game for 40 hours without any sort of challenge just to finally get to the point of it becoming interesting? That means doing thousands of meaningless fights until it actually becomes meaningful. Who comes up with such brain-dead decisions? Then we finally get to a point of being challenged and it's going to seem like a stupid increase in difficulty that we weren't ready for because the game never bothered to offer any sort of challenge beforehand to prepare us by making us interact with the systems in place. This is not good and can never be good. If people just want to experience a story with no hassle, then developers should add difficulty modes. Simple as that. But don't go creating such an incredible combat system and then almost force the player not to use it, basically, for a long time because there is no need. This combat system deserves much better in terms of balancing. Before the summary, let me cover a couple more things. Artistically, Octopath Traveler was always a strong series. Aesthetically, game looks incredible, although I still don't get the point of pixelated characters. Smooth characters would be far better and more immersive in my opinion. But I get that it's an old school thing that some people really like, so it's a subjective thing. In my opinion, smooth characters would go far better with the beautiful backgrounds. This series has probably some of the best or maybe the best overall map backgrounds aesthetically. There are other artistic choices that bother me though. First is the decision for melee attacks to not be melee attacks and instead hit from range. This could be something entirely subjective, as it might not bother anyone at all aside from myself. I do love when melee attacks connect in games. I also get that it's more about the visual effects in this game, which are really well done and serve as a way of increasing the pace of combat because melee animations would take a bit longer. But I prefer when I see melee weapons connecting with the target. For spells and ranged attacks it works incredibly well as is though. Another thing that bothers me with the art style choice of the whole series are the character models during fights. Most enemies and bosses look great, especially the main bosses, absolutely fantastic. However, when outside of combat they look like us, pixelated blobs with lack of details due to the pixel style graphical design. So when we enter combat, enemies look way different in a cool way, but we look the same. It's like I'm playing two games in one, and not in a good way. Too big of a discrepancy for my liking. Though it's another very subjective thing I guess. Some people might like that a lot. For me it takes away from the fighting. Same as it takes away from combat when such cool looking bosses end up acting almost like JPEG images throwing visual effects due to very little animation going on. I get that these things are tied to the whole series, not just this installment. I never did a review video for any of the Octopath Travelers, so this is a perfect opportunity to mention these things. I was disappointed with the voice acting too, both English and Japanese. Japanese being a better option, but still far from convincing or good. Unlike the amazing soundtrack, easy 10 out of 10 in that regard, Square rarely disappoints in this department. Overall conclusion of this early review is that in my 18 hours Octopath Traveler 0 is an okay game. Could go into the category of good too. Not great though. It's too lacking in lots of important aspects of which some of them could massively improve later. Might finish it eventually and do the full review on Patreon and Subscribestar. Can't promise anything though. Links are in the description. Thanks for watching, you overly pixelated bastards.